think people are over-optimistic about the US market and very over-optimistic. I mean, we're talking New Jersey right now. Even New Jersey is not really settled yet. I mean, I know the operators are starting, but I mean, just yesterday they had the first palpable error and amid media headlines. This is a thing in Europe, it wouldn't even scratch anybody, right? This happens every day, hundreds of times. In the States, it's like a big deal. Most people know that, other states like Philadelphia will have regulations which are probably not very prudent to any sports betting. And states like California haven't even spoken up yet. So the land of the free will take a long, long time to be free, and even it will never be free again.
And I don't even think New Jersey's made their official decision on esports.
No.
Yeah. Right. So then you got the issue of them then trying to wrap their head around esports to get it there. I mean, even in Nevada right now, it's a single event permit, so you do it like tournament by tournament there, and so they haven't even kind of got around this whole thing. So that's where I see it even longer than what it's going to take for the sports. And then you have the cross-state line issues is huge.
So would you, I know, Mark, you've got a particular opinion on this in terms of how the market opportunity could open. But Scott, you, in terms of this long game related to permissible, regulated esports betting in sync with sports wagering, how long do you think that could possibly take? Are we looking at 2 years, 3 years, 5 years potentially?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I mean, because then it's the state decides they're going to take sports betting, then they make a decision on esports. I mean, from what I understand, New Jersey's already looking at it, so I think it could be a quick follow-on, but it's not. I don't think it's going to be the same in every state. Right. Not every state's going to, I think, look at esports the same way.
Mark, do you want to interject on that? Because I know that you spoke to me about some interesting developments there.
Yeah, so I think the bigger problem is actually maybe education on the regulators' part, where some of the kind of figures they're throwing around in terms of tax is just ridiculous. And if they want to remain, for the operators to remain competitive and actually attract clients, they have to be realistic, and I think a few states have published, 20% on turnover and things like this, and essentially, if they put these regulations in place, not much is going to change. People are not going to leave the competitive bookmaker, however black market it may be, and go to a regulated one just because the odds are going to be nowhere near competitive to what's currently available to them. So, I think it's going to take not only a couple of years, but maybe even a couple of iterations of changes. Some of the early movers are not sort of better than others, but there are some states that might not actually regulate it at all. They might just leave it as it is. So the biggest change is to kind of, for people to realize this is a pretty slow process. And I think the hype around investment in maybe new startups and things like that might see a bit of trouble in the short term.
Yes. Do you think then, therefore, the industry around esports and the prospect of esports betting really needs to consider stronger lobbying with some of the lawmakers or regulators, or is there just too much of a disconnect at the moment?
I think getting into lobbying in the United States would be a bit difficult. I think esports have got our own struggles with regulators, particularly some of the publishers, and not really want to be associated with betting at all because of the loot boxes, hence the previous panel. So I think if anyone were to do lobbying, it probably should be them because they own the IPs to these games. But I can see it being disconnected. What I can see happening is that some of the brands that are already getting involved as suppliers, if you like, to some of the rights holders of the casinos, I've obviously got some form of esports offering, and it'll just be alongside the rest of sport, potentially. But we don't really know how some of that is going to work out just yet. Yeah. And like I said, if they have to pay some ridiculous turnover tax, then the experience might not be great. And there's also a few specific esports potential. In Las Vegas, there's a few bars and a few areas and arenas and things that are esports only. There's potential for some esports specific brands or suppliers to have their own little esports betting, sort of experience isolated in these kind of areas.
Okay.
That might spread to different states.
So, I mean, obviously there's some interesting challenges ahead in terms of trying to roll the esports betting proposition out. Taking that aside just for the moment, and we understand the sort of state-by-state challenges in terms of regulations, have we got any idea potentially where there's a higher demand curve at a state level? In other words, is it Las Vegas, is it New Jersey, or is it the state of Texas, for example, in terms of where the players are physically located?
The players or the people who will bet?
The people who will bet, I beg your pardon.
I honestly don't know where the bettors will be. I know where the players are. Like obviously California's a big hub because Riot and those guys are all based there. But I don't have any understanding where the bettors are.
Yeah, I don't actually think. I mean, I think esports is probably a little different from the traditional markets in that sense that I don't think we've figured out how to fully engage the bettors really, and I think the part of the problem that the U.S. presents, which is the state-by-state problem, is that those bettors are the same people who are viewing and who are playing, and they're everywhere, right? And to your point, lobbying is super expensive, so publishers aren't going to get involved because it's that becomes super complicated for them. They want to be quick to market. Easily accessible to their player base. They don't want to touch that, and no one's figured out how to sort of tap into in mass that those same players, because I think they're the same people. I don't think there's a difference, and I think appealing to them around that content that they enjoy is sort of the key to unlocking that. And it's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem where you don't have the financial push to unlock it until you start getting the cash coming in, but you also can't do it without having proper interfacing with the government, et cetera, in each state, right? Because it's not a country thing; it's a state thing.
Yeah.
It's essentially 50 different countries, and they disagree widely on how accessible gambling should be.
So it's anything but the land of the free.
I was going to say,
it's the land of many opinions.
Yeah, I guess that's the conclusion. Yeah.
So, Scott, I mean, we obviously know some of the Vegas casinos are introducing esports into their facility. Generally, have you had any particular feedback how successful that introduction is? In general, what's the general mood in Vegas? Is there going to be expansion? Does Vegas want to be the centre of the esports explosion? Because we all know, hence everybody's here today, it will come at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I'm down there quite a bit, and there's quite a few that I think would like to see Vegas become a bit of a hub. Not around the betting, but more entertainment. I mean, it's finally where entertainment dollars just pass betting dollars, and you see what the Luxor did, and so there's a few things. I've been involved with some casinos, and we put some stuff out, and so some of them are like, let's just put it there, and then they'll come, and that's not happening very, very well. There's other ones doing a better job of getting people in the door, but for those ones I talk to, it's all about the food and beverage sales. They're not doing it for betting. Food and beverage is how they're measuring some of their success right now. If they're breaking even, getting them in the door,
right. And
then they're doing free plays to try and get them to a table or a slot, which isn't necessarily appealing. But I mean, the best results I saw was one group had a tournament set up, a live tournament. They set up free to play blackjack and stuff just to check it out. Gave everyone a free play, and they had about a 35% conversion rate. So 35% of people went out and did something at a table. So there's still some of that, but I don't think they know what to offer to actually get them in the door.
And there is also, like, on the flip side, or I should say along with that, they're also trying to change what they actually have on the floor to appeal to that group as they get them in. I think the future of that, probably the very near future, is sort of a World Series of Poker type events, which are already sprouting up to try to bring people in. But again, it's an entertainment play. It's not really betting related.
So really, in terms of operators, land-based casinos, racetracks in the US, do you think their play has got to be around the entertainment value? Well, in fact, it has to be around the entertainment value because there's not anything else they can actually physically do.
Yeah, right now they don't have an option. Yeah, it's around that, and things like the casinos on the Strip are seeing gambling is in decline, right? Like their attendance is in decline, so they're trying to have to figure out how they replace the generation that would come to the slot machine, right? So, and that generation doesn't seem to want to gamble as much, at least not in the same way. So I think it's also figuring out how to make gambling more appealing to them in that sense.
Mm-hmm. So really, it's about which really esports, the ethos is, it's about the community. So it's really servicing the community at the grassroots level, whether that's in a land-based venue, whether that's online, related to some free play tournaments. So really that's the proposition at the moment. And then at the long term, once the data has been built up, the engagement, regulation permitting, the esports betting element can actually switched on. So my next question, just sort of going into the future slightly, based on Mark's information, Marco's, Caleb's, yourself, Scott, who potentially would be the winners in that scenario? Would it be a land-based casino that's now offering sports betting? He's now offering the vertical of esports betting, so it's multi-product, sort of traditional mainstream brand, or would it be, for example, Scott's business, so it's a pure play, new brand that gets the esports fan scene? What do we think, gentlemen? Or is it going to be a mixture of the both? Marco?
So it's quite a lot. Let me actually start. Like first of all, we said 50 states many times. The 50 states are so unequally distributed, it's not even funny, right? California and the East Coast, it's a tale of two coasts. No one cares about what happens in Kansas. Let's just be clear about this.
Some people do.
No. Second of all, there is no sports betting in Vegas. That's a myth. Sports betting doesn't exist in Vegas. You go to a sportsbook in Vegas, it's empty.
Correct.
And I should just be very clear about this. The only reason they have an esports arena is because it's the perfect demographic that they want to get into the Vegas that kind of thing. Vegas doesn't even do gambling anymore. Vegas is all about entertainment and shows and everything. So let's just be clear about all of that so that we start with this. Who's going to be the winner in all of this? All the fantasy sports have geared up to be gambling companies. That's why they were conceptually designed anyway. Sorry to say, but they were just a facade for gambling, right? And they have a large amount of clients that are apparently willing to gamble, right? Because that's nothing else is fantasy sports already, and they're all looking very good already. Esports is just, the reason to get esports in is because it's such an attractive demographic, right?
Absolutely.
It's the perfect demographic. It's the 18 to 24-year-old and then the 25 to 30-year-old. But what happens is you get people like me eventually who used to play esports. I'm now 40, I have disposable income, and now I might gamble. I don't have enough time yet to play esports anymore, but instead of watching the Premier League, I watch esports on the weekend. Just the same as everybody else, I like to read my newspaper, and I wouldn't mind if it had an esports section and then see how my team does. Mm-hmm. So this is the demographic that is coming, because the current demographic is, you look at the States, baseball is dying, the NFL is trying desperately to expand in Europe, decent success, NBA has problems, if they don't get enough action, like all the US sports are so US-centric, baseball is not going to exist it's going to exist, obviously, but it's never going to be the same glorious time that it was in the 60s, right?
Yes.
And so esports is the saving grace. They have a big viewership. The viewership, although the numbers are staggering. So they don't need esports for anything else than to get target access to this demographic. Mm-hmm. Who's going to do it right? I don't care. It's not going to be a land-based casino. Land-based casinos are never about gambling. They're about gambling, RNG gambling, right? Roulette or whatever, craps or whatever. They're never about sports betting. Sports betting is almost always a net loser after cost. I actually don't know a single casino that makes money with it in the big picture, right? Mm-hmm. But it's a service that people want, right?
Correct.
You want to go to Vegas and want to have this feeling to go to, oh wow, they have a cool sports book. I can go to the counter and place a wager, and then you feel like Al Capone in the movie, right? Mm-hmm. But no one is serious anymore. All right.
I like the analogy with Al Capone. Mm-hmm. He was a legend. So
just on the winner side, for us, it's a money thing as well. like that U.S. market does not play well to startup companies in gambling because we can't afford to figure out regulatory, more than one jurisdiction, and so that's where we moved more towards a software development licensing model. Now we have, and for that potential opportunity that people are going to start adding things again, because unless we get acquired by a big group or something, you're going to need so much money to take that on. So it's going to be
agreed.
Yeah.
I mean, did you want to sorry, Caleb, do you want to comment on that further?
I mean, I think the winner is whoever can figure out how to. I don't think it's anything that's geographically based. I just don't think that's the way the world works anymore, quite frankly. I think it's whoever can figure out how to deliver an accessible and, how do I say this, engaging experience around the content people are already consuming in a way that's supplemental. And I think you also need to figure out a way around some of the regulatory hurdles.
But it also goes to what you talked about, so like the U.S. being so U.S.-centric around their own sports.
Yes.
Like, for me, the reason we moved away from traditional sports, we just started esports in 2014, was that it's global. So we don't need the U.S. Like, that's what I was telling people when we were raising money and people were like, oh, you can't do it in the U.S. We're like, well, it's a really big world and everybody loves esports, and you look at the Asian market and other markets. So I'm not upset that the U.S. may be shut off to us. I never anticipated going to the U.S. anyway.
And I think that actually is probably more likely to lead to the U.S. opening up than anything else, is the fact that you can play everywhere else, and states aren't going to want to be left out. So when they start seeing businesses like Scott's working somewhere else, they want to be involved and say, hey, we want that business here. Right?
Sorry, Mark, have you got any comments on who the potential winners could be in this game?
I really do think it's the case of they need us more than we need them. And, I can see, like I said, some angles of building community and events. In Australia, it's about when you go to the races and you have a bet with cash. It feels different than having a bet online, but being able to sit at home on the couch and at any time and any day watch your favourite match and have a bet on the phone rather than going all the way down to a casino, it has some value for, sometimes, but it's not going to be the bulk like the rest of the world who, might go down to the local pub or something. And, being able to utilize online is just whatever they decide to regulate or allow. It should really be at a federal level, but obviously that's not going to happen anytime soon. But the way it's shaping up, the land only, it's going to be very slow going, to be honest. But if there is any success, I think that particularly with esports and on a previous panel with data, any kind of live experience, you have to sort of tap into data automatically. You can't really have someone just watching something on a screen and translate it into odds as easy as you can with sport. So as long as that remains as complex as it is, I think that chain of supply and everyone along the system, even the NFL and a few others are trying to lobby the regulators to actually include official league data. So that you have to have official league data, you have to basically buy it, so that the sport gets some income back, which is supposed to happen in most places, but
Correct.
Bookmakers just kind of go somewhere else. So it's very difficult, and obviously integrity as well is a big discussion, because the whole point of the original law was integrity. So there's so much to unpack. There's so many different things. We're just going to exist in esports and the rest of the world, like Scott said. There's plenty of work to do for us outside the US, and eventually they'll need us to kind of help them with their problems, like Marco said.
Let me ask another question. So obviously the clear message is in terms of if esports and betting on esports or digital gaming, if we want to phrase it that way, does come to pass in terms of regulation, we're really seeing the sort of land-based operators, whether they're casino venue, property, racetrack, are unlikely to be the long-term winners. But say the environment was created for proper regulation, could the potential winners be some of the publishers like Valve? Would they move into the marketplace? They already have huge player databases, lots of data on their players in terms of preferences. Could they potentially be the winners within this whole ecosystem?
I think they have the biggest opportunity, but there's also that same thing is also the biggest reason they don't want to get involved, because as soon as to Valve's point, right, if they're rolling out a feature, that means it's limited to a host of territories, and there's a whole other legal issue that they have to figure out for every region that they launch in, and then it also there's a media backlash, right, that comes along with that. Is that worth it for them when they're sort of, raking in billions as is? Maybe not. I think the publishers are certainly the ones with the most money to put forward in this case, right? Having been on the publisher side, that's something we actively explored, even with the likes of Caesars Entertainment. But it's just, the math doesn't add up yet.
Yeah, it's too much risk.
Right now, there's too much risk for the potential reward, and that audience doesn't engage with betting the same way anyways. So until that piece is figured out, it's not even super attractive to the publisher yet.
Okay. Anybody else got any comments on potentially the publishers providing an opportunity there? Although I do agree with what Caleb said. You get any viewpoint?
Wolf made enough money on skin betting as it is.
Right. Skin betting,
Let's be quite clear about that.
Didn't want to mention
that. Yeah.
For obvious reasons.
I don't think they'll wrap their head around gambling, as you said, but I think they will sell their data.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And know what it's being used for.
Yeah, because I think, the data is going to be a valuable commodity for businesses like that.
And I think the currencies actually, I think there's a future where the currencies become another thing that is actually used to tie those two together.
What currency?
Like game related currencies. So if you think like digital currencies, I think there's a potential way to tie the future of betting.
You have to be so careful when in-game currency gets closer to real currency.
Yes, I know.
There's a whole slew of regulations coming your way.
It's a whole set of different set of regulations, but a lot of digital currencies already have to face that issue. So some of them have solved that because they've already had to jump through those hurdles.
Data's going to be big, obviously. Because, I mean, why let anybody OCR you, right? Video capture and then resell it if you can just sell it directly, 100% accurate, 100% fast. For virtually no extra cost, slap an API on your thing and sell people to it, and it doesn't cost you a dime, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. You make an easy money, and I think they'd be surprised how much betting companies are willing to pay for this.
Absolutely.
It reminds me a little bit, to say an anecdote, like 10 years ago, when the first soccer data or whatever became really popular, I got asked by the League Commission how much we would pay for it. They didn't actually know what kind of gold mine they were sitting on, and nowadays, I mean, everything costs so much money now, and esports is going to go the same way.
Yeah. I mean, I do see the unlocking the data being the valuable play moving forward. So obviously, in terms of the actual topic which we were talking about, the potential for America, I think it's pretty clear to everyone that there isn't a real opportunity at this moment due to the regulatory challenges and various other aspects. So if we just step outside of this conversation in terms of the US, where are the hotspots in terms of esports, in terms of just giving the audience some knowledge? We'll be looking at Asia. So if America is not the opportunity at this moment in time, it's 2-3 years down the line, do you actually start your business and concentrate in Asia or Europe or Australia? Where should somebody wanting to get into the esports vertical around betting look towards?
I mean, it's just not easy. I mean, Asia sounds good, right? But then you have a whole lot of problem regarding Asian, from regulatory point of view, from payment point of view, from anything, right? I mean, yeah. But if you want to know where esports is coming from, it's Northern Europe and all the way over to the east and then down to Southeast Asia. That's what esports is. There is no Africa, there is no Latin America, there is no Australia, and obviously the US is dark in some aspects, and there would be plenty of action from the US if it would be the land of the free and the open, but that's how it is. Southern Europe doesn't exist, It's Northern Europe and then all the way to the east and then to Southeast Asia. Those are the countries, right?
Okay.
India is kind of like a sleeping giant, right?
Yeah.
I know a few of the big providers now do tournaments there. big. But I mean, anybody who's in gambling and in India knows that legality is an issue, and money movement is a much bigger issue there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In terms of bulk of viewership, though, in general with esports, China is significantly larger than everything else combined. But like said, it's not exactly completely legal, but there are obviously some grey areas around China and in terms of gambling. But if that were to change, that would be pretty significant. But it is definitely that area though that some of the sort of more interesting topics will come up.
Okay. Scott, you mentioned that your business is, I'll use the word pivoted, but I think that's a bit of a cliche. Is now more tuned to the software development. So where would you see your company's pipeline coming from?
In terms of where the software would
yes,
be? Yeah.
Yes,
so,
sorry, big pardon, yes.
We're signing our first couple of contracts, but most of it has been Asian facing. And then, we've had some people contact us out of the US, but most of the operators that have come to us so far are in Asia.
Okay. Right. Pretty much.
Secret message, phone call?
Right, so we've got some questions here. Quite interesting. So, first question from Anonymous. Remember, we're dealing with GDPR, which is a headache, never mind regulations.
The hack is back.
How will the US market differ to the established markets such as Western Europe?
It's going to be much worse for the bettors there. Definitely. Much worse.
Yeah.
Much worse odds. Much worse everything, right? I mean, if you talk Europe, you're talking UK is very good,
yes,
right? And they have Poland very bad. I mean, it depends. I mean, Europe is not one country either in that sense, but it's going to be much worse. Like Jersey is probably being on the very good side of things, so how it's going to look, and then you have maybe Philadelphia on the very bad side of things. So the US market is not going to be pretty for the bettors as it shapes out right now.
In terms of a betting product, I think might be a bit of angle on, because Americans love stats and player stats particularly. So
Huge,
there might be some angles there in terms of new types of markets and opportunities and things like that. But still, that's kind of a pretty small part of just getting the odds out there and having them decent.
Okay. Now, we've sort of answered this question, but I'll ask it anyway. Would esports be a leader on a US sportsbook? In other words, would it take more action if it was all regulated, more margin than traditional sports betting?
No, not initially. I think NFL would probably blow it away.
Yeah, it's still pretty far behind in terms of like the biggest sports, particularly in the US, but it's only because the US sports and fans are so intense. So I think the US sport there's a bigger opportunity, definitely.
I'm a little bit so the NFL specifically, it's 18 games or whatever it is, right?
Yes, sure.
We have to be a little bit careful, right, with that. I mean, every game is big in the NFL, but it's only 18 a week, right? And if you talk about esports, right, you have 10 tournaments a day now, maybe 12 sometimes or whatever it is, every day, 7 days a week, 365. Esports has quite a lot of volume, right? Obviously, per game, it's never going to rival an NFL game, but overall, it's actually very substantial, and people always underestimate what the difference is between having a true 365 sport. Even if you look at tennis, right, which is somewhat similar, but on the weekend you have one final game, right? Esports is packed. The International is a packed event. So many games every day, and every map is basically a game, if you think about that. There's a lot going on. If you think about an esports game, like if you conclude like with live betting, you probably have like a window of opportunity, sometimes of hours to wager on a game, right? Hours and hours and hours and hours, and then right after this is the next draft and the next best of 3. There's a lot of betting in esports going on, so people underestimate it a little bit because the per event is rather small.
And I think that margin's going to increase over time as younger generations get more disposable income. And that volume, I think, the volume per transaction is going to increase, right?
Clearly, what we saw is like we started like 7 years ago or whatever it is, right? And I mean, the initial time I pitched esports to my board, and it was like $50 per wager, right? And that's when I started pitching it to my board. Just as, I think it's going to be big, right? And now I mean, I think the international, we had limits for $200,000, $250,000, something like this. So I mean, and people do place wagers in size.
Yes.
I'm not saying the $200,000 wagers are flying off the screen. That's not I'm trying to suggest. But there are people who place significant wagers, right? And it's the same tradition. Like people used to be 24 in university. They loved esports. They came with their buddies. Now they have income, and they want to have a punt. Right?
Absolutely. So again, a sort of reoccurring topic through a lot of the panel sessions today. Do you think it would be profitable to put skin betting on the blockchain?
Oh my God.
It's like a
I had
buzzword
to
overload.
Need more blockchain.
So, any more questions from the audience? No?
Yeah.
That's why I left it to last. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending. I know it's late in the day, but certainly if you could give your appreciation to the panelists, please. Thank you so much.